Somebody asked me, they said, the only reason why racism still exists is because black people still give it attention. And I'm saying here, like, you know how fucking stupid you sound? So I asked AI a week later, but still I asked AI. I said, if black people acted like racism don't exist, would racism go away? It said no. Black people ignoring racism would not end it. Instead, it will likely allow racial inequalities to persist and even worsen. When you ignore racism, the silence perpetrates the bigotry. It normalizes prejudiced behaviors, and nobody takes accountability. And that denial protects a false reality. And I'd asked it, as a black person, how would I respond to others who blame black people for racism? Addressing the racist idea that black people are to blame for racism requires correcting a fundamental misunderstanding of power dynamics. Understanding the definition of racism. A racial group must have the power to enforce its prejudices through society's institutions, including legal, political, economic systems, the healthcare system, education system, archaeology, Egyptology. You don't got Romanology. You don't got Scotology. You don't got Europeology. But you got Egyptology. Anyway, black people have never held the systematic power to create and enforce racism against white people. You see that word? Never. In the United States, the system of racial hierarchy was built to benefit white people at the expense of black people and other minorities, even though we're not the minority. They just separated black to a point that they divided us and it seemed like it's a small group. But when you put us all back together, you see that we outnumber them. Anyway, blaming black people for racism is an attempt to ignore this fundamental power imbalance and historical reality. Some facts and historical systematic of injustice, proof of injustice, slavery and the black codes, the Jim Crow laws, all those was used to oppress black people, and it still exists. What would it say? That persists today. Housing and segregation, relining, redlining, that is still present. Exclusion from New Deal programs. That's crazy. And then the modern terms, the modern facts, the criminal justice system bias. Black people are disproportionately impacted by the criminal justice system, from policing to sentencing. Studies show that black people are more likely to be stopped, searched, and arrested than white people. Black on black crime is a distraction. Ooh, they got that in bold white. In arguments about police brutality against black people, the myth of black on black crime is often used to deflect from the issue of the system of systematic racism within law enforcement. Anyway, victim blaming is a key component of racism. The act of blaming black people for racism is a classic psychological defense mechanism known as victim blaming. Yeah. It allows the person making the accusation to ignore the role of the systematic oppression in history by shifting the responsibility onto the marginalized group. This is not a search for facts, but an attempt to avoid uncomfortable truths. Then you got the psychological and sociological facts, like white fragility. Ooh, my stomach. As a defense mechanism. When white people are confronted with issues of race and their complicity in a racist system, they may experience racial stress, which can trigger defense reactions like anger, argumentation, or withdrawal. This white fragility is a method of deflecting uncomfortable conversations and protecting a worldview that denies racism. That's fucked up. In-group bias and segregation. Research shows that people, both adults and children, tend to favor their in-group and act less favorably towards out-groups. America's long history of racial segregation reinforced this bias by keeping black and white communities separated, which continues to affect how people perceive and treat one another. Now I ask, as a white person, how would you what are some things that you could say to someone who blames white people for racism? And it says, as a white person, rather than arguing against the premise that all white people are to blame for racism, a more productive approach is to reframe the conversation around the complexities of the systematic racism. That way, it shifts and moves from personal blame to a broader understanding of how institutional structures and historical context perpetrate inequality regardless of an individual's intent. Systematic versus individual racism. The core problem is often not individual bad actors, but the institutional and structural system that maintain the racial inequality. Systematic racism is pervasive and deeply embedded in laws, policies, practices that produce unequal treatment even without individual racist intent. Basically, it's damn near muscle memory in the system. Right off the muscle. The system beneficiaries. While not all white people are individually prejudiced, they still benefit from a system that was built by and for white people. Notice how it said the system was built by white people. System. This is often referred to as white privilege. Understanding this concept means recognizing that one's skin color is not a barrier to success, which is an unlearned advantage.